Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this month in review video for May. There's not quite as much to talk about as the previous couple months, but there's still some pretty significant happenings, so let's take a closer look. First up, let's take a look at the results from the monthly painting contest for April. Now the winners are already made public, and I encourage you to check out the Discord and to see them. There are some absolutely gorgeous paint jobs. But rather than just rehash what's already presented there, I'd like to show some of the models that didn't win, because I think some of them deserve recognition. Now, the Legendary category only had 3 entries, so you got to see all of them on Discord. But the Unit and Solo categories had a lot more submissions, so these are the ones I think that deserve at least honorable mention. Now, I picked this first one because it shows the potential for a great-looking model with only a few colors. I also like how it demonstrates the use of black. Most of the cloth on the model is a black or a very dark gray, but with the proper highlighting, the model doesn't look like it's just been primed and then put out on the table. Now this next model shows how you can use contrasting colors really well. It's also very nicely highlighted and it's colorful as heck. It serves as a great example of how to achieve beautiful shadow and highlights without having to use washes or inks, which can sometimes darken the model and dampen those bright colors, especially for an army like the High Elves. Now this next one may be a little bit out of focus, but the realism is very impressive, as is the use of non-metallic metal on the armor. I only wish the sword were in focus so we could get a better look at it. Now I chose this next one because I think it does the model justice. It was the only submission with this particular model, and I think it has a great balance of color and metal, giving it a look that's still dark but very striking. So that's some of the honorable mentions in the solo category. If we head on over to the squad category, the first one here is another example of contrasting colors done right. The yellow draws your eyes to specific points before you scan the rest of the model, and the metallic green I think balances really nicely with the opaque black on the robes and the walker legs. Plus, the diorama presentation looks really good, and having the models set directly into the diorama rather than sitting on top of it really helps to immerse the models in the whole effect. Now this squad here, like the black paint job in the single category, shows simplicity executed really well. I especially appreciate how the blades are painted, giving them this fade and glow effect just through some well-placed highlights, especially the edge highlighting. And even while I'm not a huge fan of the little critter model, he's painted up nicely and he fits well into the squad. And finally, the bases really help to bring out the beige trim on the entire squad. Now this last unit here deserves to be here because yellow is notoriously difficult to work with, but I think these models pull it off nicely. This is that Iyanden color scheme that you didn't see much in 40K because of how difficult yellow was to paint. Now it looks like perhaps the painter used contrast or speed paints, and I've heard those have made working in yellow much easier. But if not, and these are good old-fashioned layer opaque paints, my hat is off to you, because the yellow looks nice and solid. You probably had to do a lot of layers to get that to work. The white hair also adds a nice pop to the models, and the painter even remembered to paint the eyebrows. Now, as we look forward to the next month, the May contest has added an additional Army category, giving us the chance to see an entire Army showcase. So we'll have to check out what happens with that next month. Okay, next up in review. The 3.3.1 rules update left most of us a little bit surprised, and those of us who print out their rulebooks a little bit upset. Most of the changes are pretty minor. For example, the new rules for Assault and Last Stand have been moved to the Advanced Rulebook and placed under the Extra Rules or Extra Actions. The core rules for Shaken return to the 3.3 edition. One significant change, though, is that after moving the Assault rule to the Advanced Rulebook, the charge distance penalty has been removed, meaning that hybrid units can now charge their full distance and have become very powerful, even with the reduction in quality. So we might start to see an overall shift in army creation going forward. After that, we have the Worlds Beyond campaign, which went live this month, bringing together OnePageRules, Archvillain, and Titanforge. More importantly, at least I think, is that the video launching the campaign had mini wargamer Dave as a special guest. Now, Dave previously filmed a collaborative OnePageRules battle report with Goobertown Hobbies, and getting two huge YouTubers like them is great exposure for OnePageRules. So seeing Dave come back means that the game is getting even more attention and will just keep growing. Who knows? Maybe channels like Mini Wargaming will start having OnePageRules bat reps, although I sincerely hope they don't for my sake. Now, building on that model collaboration, OnePageRules and Titanforge are also running the first official OnePageRules tournament at the UK Game Expo. This will hopefully bring more attention and publicity to both the models and the game itself, and hopefully it'll set a precedent for future events and more expos and gaming conventions. Now, looking over the rules and guidelines, the only complaint I had was the 1,500 point limit for tournament armies. Now, this is entirely a personal preference, but I find that 1,500 point armies feel very small, and the game feels more like a large skirmish than a pitched battle. But we'll have to see how the tournament turns out, and I hope to have participants, both player and organizer, on the Line of Sight podcast in upcoming months, so keep an eye out for that. Next up is Age of Fantasy Quest, which was announced back in March and has now entered beta. Patreons have access to the rules and a special army builder that they can use to build the necessary units and heroes, and to give feedback directly to OnePageRules. For those unfamiliar with Age of Fantasy Quest, think of it like Diablo or Path of Exile on a tabletop, using OnePageRules, factions, lore, and setting. Now, finally, let's look at the monthly releases. The Vampiric Undead and the High Elf fleets continue to get developments, and for the Undead, we're getting close to the very end, which means we get to see their final titanic centerpiece, and it is as amazing as it is intimidating. Seeing this vampire lord emerge from his crypt, riding on a tsunami of corpses, makes me think two things. One, I want that. Two, I don't want to paint that. Now, the vampire on a zombie dragon also looks pretty good, although I could see players swapping out the previous model of the Lord on an abyssal beast just as easily. Basically, they look like two variations of the same model. Now, I really like the stitched horrors here, because they give me some major World of Warcraft vibes. These guys look like adaptations of the abominations from World of Warcraft, and I love it. The Skeleton Knights have a pretty solid look to them. I like everything about them except for the helmet. If I had a choice, I'd rather have them wear a full helmet instead of the cap-type helmet that shows the lower half of their face. Either that, or just have them go helmetless and have their skulls showing, maybe with some fire or something to give them a little bit more of an effect. Now, the Vampire Champion on his steed also looks pretty good, and for some reason the half helmet on this guy doesn't really bother me. Maybe that's because character models typically show more of their face, maybe it's because the wings help balance it, I don't know. Lastly, for the Vampiric Undead, we have the werewolves, and I think these look absolutely fantastic, and they also give me some serious WoW vibes. Now, the Werewolf Champion with that gigantic sword looks particularly good, though I think he's going to need to watch his back because Cloud from Final Fantasy VII is probably going to come looking for it. Moving on to the High Elf fleets. Last month, I said I liked the models as they were, but I felt that there wasn't enough to distinguish them as science fiction, and that with the right paint scheme, they could easily fit into a fantasy army. Now, I still hold to that, but I think these models in this release do a better job establishing themselves as sci-fi, mostly due to the weapon design. So first up, we have the Stingers. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that one, but I do think that the pose that the champion has looks really cool, and the blades look just right. They have enough of a futuristic design to break the mold from fantasy and establish these as a futuristic sci-fi model. Now, personally, I'd go with the hooded look because it gives me an Assassin's Creed vibe, and I've always been a big fan of that franchise, at least of the original trilogy, Black Flag and Odyssey. The Scorchers also look pretty decent, and they'll add a nice break in the aesthetic of the army, particularly the champion. Again here, I go with the masked version, as I'm not a huge fan of the bull ring in the nose. It seems more like something wood elves would do rather than high elves. And of course, there's the Pokemon familiar. I don't know, maybe the unit brings him along as a snack since they already have a portable barbecue. I gotta be honest, if I start collecting a high elf fleet army, I'm not printing this guy. Last of all, we have the high elf tank. Now, as I mentioned with the APC, I'm not huge on the look of these, as they look like the Great Pyramid of Giza in the third trimester. And with the addition of those turrets, I'd say it's about ready to nurse. But that's what I like about model agnostic games. I can find another vehicle that I think looks better and fit it in with the rest of the sculpts that are already here. Now, finally, OnePageRules has posted a couple of teaser images of what the new Shadowstalker designs will look like, not just sketches, but 3D renderings. While the state that the designs currently have might change between these initial images and the final STL files, I don't think they'll change that much. And the first one here confirms what I said about the sketches from last month's preview. The army looks like an amalgamation of undead, beastmen, and wormhole demons. This other model here looks more like something from an army that you'd call the Shadowstalkers. And if I were to start collecting this army, I'm pretty sure I'd put this guy in it, but I might hold off on the rank and file to either look for a different model line or see what else comes in the release. Because again, we're still very, very early in it. So, that's it for the month of May. Let me know what you guys think about OPR tournaments, rules updates, and model releases. And until next time, keep your dice on the table.